This episode of Matt's Mysteries contains material that some may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you. Hello everyone and welcome back to Matt's Mysteries. I'm Matt, also known as Dave Bautista, after an alien handed him a magic basketball. And today, we're getting straight up nautical, supernatural, and just generally weird. If you like boats, chemicals, mystery, and Michael Bay level explosions, then stick around, because I'm going to tell you about the mystery surrounding the Ourang Medan. Episode 3 of Matt's Mysteries. Our tale begins in either 1947 or 1948, along the Straits of Malacca. Suddenly, the peace and quiet of the sea was disturbed when an odd and rather ominous distress call echoed to any and all ships sailing along that narrow stretch of water. The call in question stated,
"All officers, including captain, are dead. Lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead."
What followed was a frenzied segment of indecipherable Morse code. However, the call would end with two words. Those words were,
"I die."
It's pretty weird and super ominous, right? The SOS message was picked up by American ships, as well as some monitoring stations in both the UK as well as the Netherlands, and all were able to pinpoint the source of the distress signal. They found that it likely came from a Dutch freighter called the SS Ourang Medan. An American vessel called the Silver Star was the first to respond to the distress signal, springing into action, drastically changing their course in attempts to provide any and all aid to the ship and its crew. However, it would take hours before the Silver Star was able to locate the Medan, as it floated aimlessly along the water. As the Silver Star began its final approach, the crew called out a number of times to the crew of the Dutch freighter. However, they were unsuccessful in every attempt. They ultimately reached the Medan and began to board. However, they were definitely not prepared for the bizarre scene of sheer terror and mystery that they stumbled upon. The deck of the Medan was allegedly littered with the bodies of its crew, with each individual sporting a haunting look of absolute terror on their face, as if they had laid their eyes on some sort of unspeakable, indescribable horror moments before passing. The Americans continued their search, ultimately finding the captain of the Medan on the ship's bridge. He was also deceased, and all of his officers lay scattered around the wheelhouse. Much like the rest of the crew they discovered to that point, they also had looks of sheer terror on their faces, eyes wide open, frozen in the fear they felt in their final moments. That's very spooky, but unfortunately, it gets worse. The communications officer was eventually found, his fingers still clinging to the telegraph used to send out the distress signal that brought the Silver Star to this horrifying and rather bizarre scene. Down in the boiler room, more bodies were found in a similar state to those found before. It seemed as if the distress call was entirely accurate in stating that the whole crew was indeed dead. The responding crew of the Silver Star noted that it didn't seem like there was any sort of foul play involved in the deaths of the Medan's crew. also pointing out that the ship didn't seem to be suffering from any sort of physical damage. So, what happened exactly? We'll get to that in a minute. The only course of action at this point was to tow the Medan to shore, where it could be examined and investigated in depth. However, before the American crew could even secure the tow line to the Medan, a mysterious smoke began billowing off the ship. This smoke was then followed by a mysterious, unexpected explosion, said to be so powerful that it actually lifted the ship out of the water slightly before ultimately sinking beneath the waves. It then disappeared, cementing itself as a truly mysterious maritime legend, one that is discussed and debated to this day. So, what happened to the ship that caused it to explode? And, more importantly, what claimed the lives of the ship's crew? I'll be real with you, we do need to address a very specific elephant in the room before we can get into theories and speculation. It should be noted that the SS Ourang Medan is effectively a ghost ship. And I don't mean that in the literal sense of it being haunted, though I guess that's possible. What I mean is that it doesn't show up on any registry, and no official record of the Silver Star responding to its distress call exists. Some speculate that the lack of a registry could be explained, with the ship actually being registered in Sumatra. The name Ourang Medan can be loosely translated to man from Medan, with Medan being one of the Sumatran islands. Furthermore, a German researcher named Theodor Siersdorfer, had come across a publication from 1953. This publication, titled Das Totenschiffen der Südsee, I swear to God I'm trying, can be translated to the death ship in the South Seas, and allegedly corroborates the existence and ultimate fate of the Medan and its crew. It also offers potential theories as to why the ship exploded, and perhaps even what caused the deaths of the captain and crew. I'm going to do my best to elaborate on those theories, but here they are. Time for the theories. The death ship in the South Seas suggests that the ship was transporting an assortment of dangerous chemicals at the time of the tragedy. Specifically, it is speculated that the Medan was carrying potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. While these are highly volatile chemicals, I'd like to point out that there are other chemicals out there that specifically ignite when coming into contact with water. However, like I mentioned before, the speculation points to those two specifically. Now, if this is true, then it could indeed explain the sudden fire and eventual explosion the Medan ultimately suffered. Also, given that transporting such volatile and sensitive cargo shortly after the end of World War II could be seen as rather tumultuous, it somewhat makes sense that the registration for the ship be kept hidden, to avoid potentially causing some sort of international incident. I mean, it could be that, or the fact that transporting such chemicals and possibly others could have been heavily regulated by the powers of the time. And if this is true, it would mean that if the Medan did not have clearance to carry such chemicals, they would have to sail under the radar, possibly altering the ship's name on the registration paperwork at each port it visited. I get it, it's a stretch, but we do see similar things happening in the present day, with illegal exports and cargo registering under false names, ultimately to eliminate the possibility of a paper trail that could expose the transporter and their employer, potentially leading to their apprehension and incarceration. With all of that said, this doesn't exactly explain the fate of the crew. If you ask me, a guy who knows basically nothing about chemicals and chemistry outside of like Chem 101 in university, I'd argue that if potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin don't produce gases that cause madness and what appears to be death by fear, or at the very least some sort of asphyxiation or suffocation, then it's possible that the Medan may have been carrying more than just those two chemicals, and that those chemicals may be responsible for the bizarre state the Silver Star found the Medan's crew in. Chemicals including, but not limited to, trichlorosilane react with water and produce corrosive and highly toxic fumes that could have fatally affected the ship's crew should they have inhaled them. Now, keep in mind, this is pure speculation on my part. However, given that there were no obvious signs of violence or foul play, I'd rule out the possibility of some sort of physical attack. I guess it could be supernatural, but honestly, what could have caused that? I don't think ghosts just swim around the ocean waiting for a ship to prey on. Anyway, 3 weeks after the Medan allegedly sank, a lifeboat washed up on the shores of Taongi, an island part of the Marshall Islands. 7 people were said to be aboard this lifeboat, with 6 arriving deceased. The 7th was allegedly taken to a village where they were cared for by a local missionary. While being treated, this individual supposedly revealed that they were the 2nd officer of the Medan. He allegedly went on to explain that the Medan had arrived in Shanghai on June 7th, where this officer had been recruited. He stated that those commanding the ship refused to see any sort of credentials or paperwork from any of the crew they were recruiting, which is pretty suspicious to be sure. To further add to this suspicion, it is said that 7,000 boxes of an unknown material were loaded onto the ship under a cover of darkness, and that the ship would sail to a small harbor roughly 80 nautical miles south of Shanghai, where a further 8,000 boxes were added to the cargo hold. This officer allegedly suspected that the ship was carrying some sort of contraband, hence all the secrecy when loading the boxes on board, as well as the ship allegedly sailing without proper registration. Now, this more or less tracks with the theory and my added speculation that the Medan may have been carrying volatile and possibly even toxic chemicals on board, cargo they may not have had the authorization or clearance to carry and transport. I should point out once more that this is all pure hearsay. However, if it is true, then we might have the answer to the fate of the Medan laying before us. The alleged 2nd officer went on to say that the ship had avoided the usual shipping routes to secretly transport these goods, which, again, adds to the suspicion, with the apparent destination being somewhere near Costa Rica. He states that around 10 days into the voyage, various members of the crew inexplicably began falling violently ill. Allegedly, they began suffering severe stomach pains, among other ailments, before ultimately passing away. It was at this point where the 2nd officer decided to investigate, and he allegedly discovered that the Medan was transporting roughly 15,000 boxes of sulfuric acid and potassium cyanide, in addition to 20 canisters of nitroglycerin. Like the theory and my added speculation, the officer believes that the chemicals had not been stored or secured properly, causing a leak where noxious fumes began forming. This could explain the state that the bodies were found in, and why the ship suddenly caught fire and exploded. However, we can't know for certain if literally any of this is true. As this was brought to the ship's command, it is said that the captain allegedly refused to issue any sort of emergency distress calls. Again, further adding to the suspicion that they were in possession of something they just shouldn't have had. With this refusal to request any sort of aid, the 2nd officer and 6 crewmates had had enough, and ultimately boarded a lifeboat to escape the doomed freighter. And if you've been paying attention, we all know what happens to the Medan from there. And that's seemingly where the story ends. So, was it an assortment of chemicals that led to the crew dying in such a frightening and bizarre way? Could that also explain why the ship caught fire and exploded before it could safely be towed back to shore? Or was it something more on the supernatural side of things? Like the resident skeptic that I not so confidently consider myself, I personally think that the contraband theory might just be what caused the mysterious series of events leading up to the ship sinking explosion. That is, if it happened at all. But what do you think? Thank you so much for tuning in to today's mystery. If there's a mystery you'd like me to cover, don't hesitate to leave a comment on the video. If you like what you saw and are interested in learning about more mysteries from a cartoon detective, consider subscribing to the channel. I'll post once a week and will occasionally post twice if I'm feeling extra rowdy. So get ready, because there are a lot of mysteries for me to share. Until the next one, this is Matt telling you to stay mysterious.